3 hours. That's all it was supposed to be. 3 hours of playing pretend at a corporate gala, wearing a borrowed dress and a practiced smile. Then she'd walk away with $5,000 and never see him again. But when Alexander Kane's lips touched hers under the glittering chandeliers, when his hand pressed against the small of her back with a possessiveness that felt too real, Emma Hart forgot the most important rule. Never believe the lie. If you want to discover how a desperate art teacher became entangled in a dangerous game of pretend that turned into the most real thing she'd ever felt, subscribe to the channel now. Leave a like if you believe that sometimes the best love stories begin with deception. And tell me in the comments where you're listening to this story from. Your presence here makes all the difference. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, sliding into Emma's inbox like fate wrapped in pixels. She was sitting in her cramped studio apartment in Brooklyn, surrounded by half-finished canvases and overdue bills that seemed to multiply like rabbits every time she looked away. The subject line read, "Urgent. High-paying opportunity. One night only." Any other day, she would have deleted it as spam. But that Tuesday, with her landlord's eviction notice taped to her door and her bank account showing a balance that made her stomach hurt, Emma clicked it open. The message was brief, professional, almost cold. A private staffing agency was seeking an elegant, well-spoken woman for a corporate event. The requirements were specific. Age 25 to 32. Height between 5'4" and 5'8". Comfortable in formal settings. Able to maintain confidentiality. The compensation made her breath catch. $5,000 for 3 hours of work. Emma stared at the number until it blurred. $5,000 would cover her rent for 3 months. It would buy her time to finish the commission pieces she'd been working on. It would mean she wouldn't have to call her parents and admit that moving to New York to pursue art had been the beautiful, terrible mistake everyone had warned her about. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She should ignore this. Nothing legitimate paid that much for 3 hours. But desperation has a way of making dangerous things look reasonable, and Emma Hart was drowning in a sea of unpaid bills and broken dreams. She replied. The response came within 10 minutes, and 2 hours later, she was sitting in a sleek office in Midtown Manhattan, across from a woman named Patricia Chen, who wore pearls and practiced skepticism like armor. Patricia's dark eyes scanned Emma from head to toe, assessing, calculating, deciding. "You understand this is completely confidential?" Patricia said, her voice crisp as fresh snow. "Absolutely," Emma replied, trying to keep her hands from trembling. The client is a prominent businessman who needs a companion for a corporate gala this Saturday. His presence, with a partner, is expected. The relationship must appear genuine, established, comfortable. Patricia paused, her gaze sharpening. "Can you act, Miss Hart?" Emma thought about the years she'd spent pretending her art career was going well, pretending she wasn't scared, pretending she didn't cry herself to sleep some nights, wondering if she'd made a catastrophic mistake with her life. "Yes," she said simply. "I can act." Patricia slid a document across the desk. The contract was thorough, almost frighteningly so. Emma would pose as the girlfriend of Alexander Kane, CEO of Kane Industries, for exactly 3 hours at the annual Metropolitan Business Leaders Gala. She would arrive with him, remain by his side throughout the event, and leave with him. She would engage in appropriate physical contact, up to and including hand-holding, arm-linking, and brief kisses if the situation warranted. She would tell no one about the arrangement, before, during, or after. Violation of confidentiality would result in legal action and financial penalties that made Emma's head spin. "Why?" Emma asked, the word escaping before she could stop it. "Why does he need to hire someone?" Patricia's expression didn't change. "That's not your concern. Your concern is whether you can fulfill the requirements professionally. Can you? Emma looked at the contract, at the number written at the bottom. $5,000. 3 hours. She signed. Saturday arrived too quickly and too slowly at the same time. Emma spent Friday night practicing in front of her mirror, trying on different smiles, different ways of standing, different versions of a woman who belonged in a world of champagne and chandeliers. The dress arrived Friday afternoon, delivered by a courier who made her sign for it as if it contained state secrets. When she opened the box, Emma understood why. The gown was midnight blue silk that caught the light like water, with a neckline that was daring without being obscene, and a fit that suggested someone had taken very accurate measurements of her body without her knowledge. She tried not to think too hard about that part. Saturday evening, a car arrived at exactly 6 o'clock. Not a taxi or an Uber, but an actual car with an actual driver who held the door open and called her Miss Hart, as if she were someone important. The drive through Manhattan felt surreal, like she'd stepped through a mirror into a world that existed parallel to her own. And then they arrived at the Metropolitan Club, and Emma saw him for the first time. Alexander Kane stood at the top of the stone steps, and he was nothing like she'd imagined. She'd pictured someone older, softer, the kind of man who needed to rent a date because he couldn't get one legitimately. But Alexander Kane was 36 and looked like he'd been carved from marble by someone who understood that power and beauty weren't mutually exclusive. He wore a tuxedo the way some men wore their own skin, comfortable and commanding. His dark hair was styled with casual precision, and his gray eyes, when they found her emerging from the car, were the color of storms over the ocean. He descended the steps with a grace that seemed almost predatory, and when he reached her, he extended his hand. "Emma Hart," he said, and his voice was deep, textured like expensive whiskey. "Thank you for coming." She placed her hand in his, and the contact sent something electric racing up her arm. His hand was warm, strong, and when his fingers closed around hers, she felt the carefully constructed character she'd built start to crack at the edges. "Mr. Kane," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Please," he said, and something flickered in those gray eyes. "Call me Alexander. We're supposed to be in love after all." He said it matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather, but Emma caught something underneath the words, a bitterness, maybe, or a loneliness so profound it had learned to disguise itself as indifference. He offered her his arm, and she took it, feeling the solid muscle beneath the expensive fabric. As they walked up the steps together, he leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "The story is that we met 6 months ago at an art gallery opening. You're an artist, which is true, which makes the lie easier. We've been seeing each other seriously for 4 months. I'm intensely private about my personal life, which is why no one has met you before. Can you remember that?" Emma nodded, her heart hammering. Art gallery opening. 6 months ago. Seriously involved for 4. Good. His hand pressed against the small of her back as they entered the building, and the touch felt possessive, protective, real. "One more thing. My ex-fiancée will be here tonight. Victoria Ashford. She'll try to unsettle you. Don't let her." Before Emma could ask what he meant, they were inside, and the world transformed into crystal and gold and faces that belonged on magazine covers. The ballroom was a cathedral of wealth, with chandeliers that looked like captured stars, and marble floors so polished Emma could see her reflection. Everywhere she looked, there were people who belonged here, people who moved through this world as naturally as breathing. Alexander's hand never left the small of her back, a constant warm pressure that anchored her to him. He introduced her to a blur of names and titles. "This is Emma, my girlfriend. She's an artist." Something in the way he said it, with a quiet pride that felt genuine, made her chest tighten. They moved through the crowd together, and Emma found herself falling into the role more easily than she'd expected. She laughed at the right moments, asked polite questions, leaned into Alexander's side when he pulled her closer. His hand found hers, fingers interlacing, and she could feel his pulse beating against her palm. It was all pretend, she reminded herself, all carefully orchestrated theater. But her body didn't seem to understand that. Every time he touched her, every time his eyes found hers across a conversation, something inside her responded with an intensity that terrified her. "You're doing beautifully," he murmured during a brief moment alone. "You're a natural liar." She should have been offended, but the way he said it, with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes, made it sound like a compliment and a confession all at once. "What about you?" she asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "Are you a natural liar too?" Alexander looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a moment, the mask slipped. She saw something raw underneath, something hurt and angry and achingly human. "I've had a lot of practice," he said quietly. Then someone called his name, and the mask was back in place, smooth and impenetrable as glass. The evening wore on in a haze of champagne and careful conversation. Emma found herself studying Alexander when she thought he wasn't looking. The way his jaw tightened when certain people spoke to him, the way his eyes tracked the room constantly, as if expecting an attack. The way he touched her, his hand on her waist, his fingers brushing her arm, with a frequency that seemed more than necessary for their charade. And then Victoria Ashford appeared. Emma knew who she was immediately, even before Alexander's entire body tensed beside her. Victoria was everything Emma wasn't, tall and blonde and polished to an impossible shine, wearing a red dress that probably cost more than Emma made in a year. She approached with a smile that was all sharp edges. "Alexander," Victoria said, her voice honey over broken glass. "How lovely to see you. And who is this?" Alexander's arm slid around Emma's waist, pulling her against his side. The gesture was protective, possessive, and Emma could feel the tension radiating through his body. "Victoria, this is Emma Hart, my girlfriend. Emma, this is Victoria Ashford." Emma extended her hand, forcing a smile. "It's nice to meet you." Victoria's handshake was brief, dismissive. Her eyes raked over Emma with unconcealed assessment, and Emma could see the calculations happening behind that perfect facade. "An artist, Alexander told me," Victoria said. "How bohemian. Quite a change from your usual type." There was a challenge in her voice, a test. Emma felt Alexander's hand tighten on her waist. "Emma is nothing like anyone I've ever known," Alexander said, and something in his voice made Emma look up at him. He was looking at Victoria, but his words felt like they were meant for someone else. "That's precisely why I love her." The word hung in the air between them. Love, and Emma felt it land against her chest like a stone. He was acting, she reminded herself. This was all part of the performance, but the way he said it, with a quiet intensity that made her breath catch, felt dangerously close to truth. Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "How romantic. I didn't know you still believed in love, Alexander. You certainly made it clear you didn't when we were together." "I didn't believe in it with you," Alexander replied, his voice cool. "There's a difference." The tension between them was thick enough to cut, and Emma found herself stepping closer to Alexander, her hand sliding up to rest against his chest. She could feel his heart beating hard and fast beneath her palm. "Victoria," Emma said, keeping her voice gentle but firm. "It was nice meeting you, but I think they're about to start the dinner service. We should find our table." Victoria's eyes flicked to Emma's hand on Alexander's chest, and something dark flickered in her gaze. Of course. Enjoy your evening. I'm sure it will be memorable." She walked away, but not before Emma caught the look she shot back at them, a look that promised this wasn't over. Alexander let out a breath he seemed to have been holding. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "She can be difficult." "It's fine," Emma replied, though her heart was still racing. "That's what you're paying me for, right? To deal with difficult exes?" Something flickered across his face. Hurt, maybe, or disappointment. But it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "Right," he said, his voice suddenly distant. "That's exactly what I'm paying you for." They found their table, and Emma tried to ignore the sudden coldness that had settled between them. Dinner was an elaborate affair, course after course of food that was more art than sustenance. Alexander spoke politely to the people around them, his hand occasionally finding Emma's under the table. But the warmth from earlier had vanished, replaced by something mechanical and hollow. Emma found herself missing it, missing him, which was absurd because she'd never really had him in the first place. After dinner, there was dancing. The orchestra began playing something slow and elegant, and couples drifted onto the marble floor like leaves on water. Alexander stood, offering his hand. "May I?" Emma placed her hand in his, and he led her to the dance floor. When he pulled her into his arms, when his hand settled on her waist, and hers rested on his shoulder, the coldness began to thaw. They moved together with a synchronicity that shouldn't have been possible for two people who'd just met. Alexander was a good dancer, confident and sure, guiding her through the steps with an ease that made her feel graceful, beautiful, like she belonged here after all. "You dance well," he said, his voice close to her ear. "My mother insisted on lessons when I was young," Emma replied. She had this idea that every girl should know how to waltz. I thought it was ridiculous at the time. And now? Now I'm grateful. She looked up at him, finding his gray eyes already on her. "You dance well, too." "Same story. My mother's insistence. She said a man who couldn't dance was a man who couldn't court properly." He paused, something shifting in his expression. "She died when I was 16. "I'm sorry," Emma said, and she meant it. Alexander nodded, his hand tightening slightly on her waist. "She would have liked you. She always said I should find someone real, someone who hadn't been polished smooth by this world." He gestured vaguely at the ballroom around them. "Someone who still had edges." "I'm not real," Emma reminded him softly. "I'm someone you hired for the evening." "Are you?" Alexander asked, and his gaze was so intense she felt it like a physical touch. "Because you don't feel hired. You feel like the only genuine thing in this entire room." Emma's breath caught. This was too much, too close to something that could hurt her. "Alexander, we should remember what this is. I'm an actress playing a role. You're a client fulfilling a contract. She glanced at her watch. 45 minutes. This ends, and we go back to being strangers. What if I don't want to be strangers?" The words were out before he seemed to realize he was going to say them. Emma could see the surprise in his own eyes, as if his mouth had betrayed him. They stopped moving, though the music continued around them. Other couples swirled past, but Emma felt like they were frozen in place, suspended in a moment that was balanced on the edge of something dangerous. "You don't mean that," she said, though her voice trembled. "You don't even know me. I know you're an artist who's struggling to make rent. I know you took this job because you were desperate, not because you wanted to. I know you bit your lip 3 times during dinner when you were nervous. I know you have paint under your thumbnail that you tried to scrub off but couldn't quite get. I know the way you laugh is genuine, not practiced like everyone else here. I know." "Stop," Emma interrupted, her heart hammering. "Please stop." "Why?" "Because you're making this feel real, and it's not." It can't be. Alexander's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. What if I want it to be real? Emma pulled back, breaking the contact, creating space between them, even though every cell in her body screamed at her to close the distance instead. You're caught up in the performance, she said, forcing herself to sound rational, controlled. This is what happens when people play pretend. The lines blur. But that doesn't make it real. Alexander's jaw tightened. You think I can't tell the difference between performance and reality? I think you're a man who hired someone to pretend to love him for an evening, which suggests maybe reality isn't working out so well for you. The words came out harsher than she intended, and she watched them land, watched something in Alexander's eyes go cold, and shuddered. You're right, he said, his voice flat. I apologize for making you uncomfortable. That wasn't professional of me. He stepped back, creating formal distance between them, and Emma felt the loss of his warmth like a physical ache. We have 30 minutes left. Let's finish this properly, shall we? The rest of the evening passed in a blur of mechanical politeness. Alexander kept his hand on her waist when required, smiled when expected, played the part of the devoted boyfriend with flawless precision. But the connection they'd built over the past hours was gone, replaced by something brittle and false. Emma told herself this was better, safer. She told herself she was protecting both of them from something that could only end badly. She told herself the hollow feeling in her chest was relief, not regret. But when the 3 hours finally ended, when Alexander walked her back to the waiting car, she felt like she was mourning something she'd never actually had. Thank you for your services this evening, Alexander said formally, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. You'll find the agreed-upon payment, plus a bonus for dealing with Victoria. Emma took the envelope, the paper thick and expensive between her fingers. You didn't have to give me a bonus. You earned it. His gray eyes met hers, and for a moment, she saw past the coldness to the hurt underneath. You played your part perfectly. I'm sure Patricia will be in touch if we need your services again. The words stung more than they should have. Right. Well, good night, Mr. Kane. Good night, Miss Hart. He turned to walk back into the building, and Emma should have gotten into the car. She should have driven away and never looked back. She should have taken the money and forgotten this night ever happened. Instead, she heard herself call out, Alexander, wait. He stopped, his back to her, shoulders tense. Emma walked toward him, her heels clicking on the stone steps, the envelope still clutched in her hand. For what it's worth, she said quietly, I don't think you need to hire someone to love you. I think you just need to let someone see the person you were tonight. Not the CEO, not the businessman, just you. Alexander turned slowly, and the expression on his face was complex, layered with emotions she couldn't quite read. And who was I tonight? Someone real, someone hurt, someone lonely, someone kind. She paused. Someone I could have fallen for, if circumstances were different. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, and before Emma could process what was happening, his hands were framing her face, and his mouth was on hers. The kiss was nothing like the brief performed touches they'd exchanged inside for their audience. This was desperate, hungry, real. His lips moved against hers with an intensity that made her knees weak, and when his tongue swept into her mouth, she made a sound that was half gasp, half surrender. Emma's hands fisted in his tuxedo jacket, pulling him closer, the envelope falling forgotten to the ground. She kissed him back with everything in her, all the longing she'd been suppressing for the past 3 hours, all the impossible want she'd been trying to deny. Alexander tasted like champagne and something darker, something that made her head spin. His hand slid from her face to her hair, his fingers threading through the careful updo until pins scattered like stars across the steps. One hand dropped to her waist, pulling her flush against him, and Emma could feel the hard planes of his body, the racing of his heart that matched her own. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "That," he said, his voice rough, "was real. Tell me you felt it." "I felt it," Emma whispered, because denying it would have been a lie too big to speak. "I felt everything." "Then don't go. Not yet." His thumb traced her swollen lower lip. "Come back to my apartment, just to talk. No expectations, no obligations. Just two people who want to see if this thing between us is as real as it feels." Every rational part of Emma's brain was screaming at her to refuse, to get in the car, to run while she still could. This man was dangerous, not because he was cruel, but because he made her want impossible things. He made her want to believe that fairy tales could come true, that Cinderella could actually end up with the prince, that a desperate art teacher from Brooklyn and a billionaire CEO could somehow make sense. "Okay," she said, and watched something like relief flood his face. "Just to talk." Alexander's apartment wasn't what Emma expected, though she wasn't sure what she had expected. Maybe cold minimalism, all glass and steel and sharp edges. Instead, when they entered the penthouse overlooking Central Park, she found warmth. Exposed brick walls held actual paintings, real art, not just expensive pieces bought for investment. Books lined shelves, their spines cracked with reading. A worn leather couch faced floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city lights like a living painting. "You look surprised," Alexander said, shrugging off his tuxedo jacket. "I am," Emma admitted, walking toward a canvas that dominated one wall. It was abstract, bold strokes of color that suggested emotion rather than form. "This is a Rebecca Mitchell original. You know her work?" There was genuine pleasure in his voice. "I interned at her studio for a summer during college. She taught me that art doesn't have to be pretty to be true." Emma turned to find Alexander watching her with an intensity that made her skin warm. "She's brilliant. This piece is called Breaking Point. She painted it after her divorce." "I know. I bought it because it felt like she'd painted my life." He moved closer, stopping just within touching distance. "Want to know a secret? I don't just collect art. I paint." Emma blinked. "You paint?" "Badly. Terribly. But yes." He led her to a room off the main living space, flipping on a light to reveal a studio that made her heart ache with envy. North-facing windows, professional easels, supplies that would cost her 3 months' rent, and canvases, dozens of them, stacked against the walls. Alexander pulled one out, and Emma caught her breath. It wasn't terrible at all. The painting showed the city at dawn, but fractured, as if seen through broken glass. The technique was rough, but the emotion was raw, honest, real. "This is beautiful," she said softly. "This is pain that learned how to speak." "That's exactly what it is." Alexander set the canvas down, running a hand through his hair. "I started painting after Victoria, and I split. My therapist suggested I needed a way to process emotion that didn't involve destroying business rivals or drinking myself into oblivion." "What happened between you two?" Emma asked, then immediately regretted the question. "I'm sorry. That's not my business." "No, it's fair." Alexander leaned against his work table, crossing his arms. "We were engaged for 2 years. Society wedding planned, 500 guests, ice sculptures, the whole obscene display. I thought we loved each other. Then I found out she'd been sleeping with my business partner for 18 months. When I confronted her, she laughed. Said I'd been so busy building my empire, I hadn't noticed she was bored. That I was boring. That she'd only stayed because my name opened doors she wanted to walk through. The pain in his voice was carefully controlled, but Emma could hear it bleeding through the cracks. Victoria was at that gala tonight because she married my former partner 6 months ago. They run a competing firm now, using strategies I developed, connections I built. And they wanted me to see them, happy, successful, thriving. They wanted me to know that losing me hadn't hurt either of them at all. Emma moved closer, her hand finding his. But losing them hurt you, like a knife between the ribs that never quite healed. His fingers intertwined with hers. That's why I hired you. Not because I needed a date, because I needed armor. I needed someone who could stand beside me and make them believe I'd moved on, that I was fine, that they hadn't taken something from me I couldn't replace. But you're not fine. No, I'm not. He looked at their joined hands, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. But tonight, when I was with you, I felt something I haven't felt in 2 years. I felt like maybe I could be fine. Like maybe there was something beyond this hollow, angry thing I've become. Emma's chest tightened. Alexander, you can't put that on me. I can't be your salvation. I can barely save myself. I'm not asking you to save me. He looked up, meeting her eyes. I'm asking if you felt it too. That connection, that electricity. Tell me I'm not crazy. Tell me you felt something real. I felt it, Emma admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. But feeling something doesn't mean we should act on it. We're from different worlds. You're a CEO. I'm an artist who can't make rent. You live in a penthouse. I live in a walk-up with questionable plumbing. This doesn't make sense. Since when does love make sense? The question hung between them, heavy with possibility and danger. This isn't love, Emma said, but her voice trembled. We just met 4 hours ago. And yet I feel like I've known you longer than people I've known for years. Alexander's free hand came up to cup her face. Tell me you don't feel it. Tell me this is just chemistry, just attraction, just two lonely people seeking comfort. Tell me that, and I'll call you a car right now. You can leave and we'll never see each other again. Emma tried to form the words, tried to build the wall between them that logic and reason demanded. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was the truth. I can't tell you that, because it would be a lie. Alexander's breath shuddered out of him, relief and want, and something deeper mingling in his expression. Then stay, not as someone I hired, not as part of a contract, just as Emma. Stay, and let's see if this is real. This is crazy, Emma whispered, even as her body swayed toward his. Completely insane, Alexander agreed, his thumb tracing her lower lip. I'm probably going to regret this. You're probably going to break my heart. I'm definitely going to break yours if you let me close. His smile was sad, knowing. Then I guess we're both taking a risk. He kissed her again, but this time it was different. Slower, deeper. A kiss that felt like a question and an answer all at once. Emma's arms wound around his neck, and she let herself fall into it, into him, into this beautiful, terrifying thing that was blooming between them. They moved through the apartment in a haze of touches and whispered words. Alexander's fingers found the zipper of her dress, sliding it down with aching slowness. Emma's hands worked the buttons of his shirt, revealing warm skin and hard muscle underneath. They left a trail of expensive clothing across the hardwood floor, breadcrumbs marking the path to his bedroom. The bedroom was simple, surprisingly so. A massive bed with white sheets, more windows framing the city, a single painting on the wall, a watercolor of a woman's face, abstract enough that features blurred into emotion, concrete enough that Emma could see the longing in every brushstroke. Who painted this? She asked, her fingers trailing the scars on Alexander's chest, marks she hadn't expected to find. I did, he said quietly. It's you. Emma's breath caught. How? We just met. I know. But when I started it 3 months ago, trying to capture the idea of someone who could see past all the bullshit, trying to imagine what real connection might look like, this is the face that appeared. And when you walked up those steps tonight, it was like she'd stepped out of the canvas. Emma looked at the painting again, then at Alexander, and something inside her cracked open. You're either the most elaborate liar I've ever met, or the most romantic fool. Can I be both? His smile was soft, vulnerable in a way that made her ache. They fell onto the bed together, and what happened next was both exactly what Emma expected, and nothing like it at all. There was passion, yes, heat and urgency, and the kind of chemistry that made thinking impossible. But there was also tenderness. The way Alexander's hands shook slightly when he touched her, the way he kept pausing to look at her, as if committing every detail to memory, the way he whispered her name like a prayer, like a promise, like the answer to a question he'd been asking for years. When Emma cried out, it wasn't just from physical pleasure. It was from the overwhelming sensation of being seen, really seen, for the first time in longer than she could remember. Alexander held her afterward, his heartbeat steady against her ear, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. Stay tonight, he murmured into her hair. And tomorrow? Emma asked, because she needed to know, needed to understand what she was walking into. Tomorrow, we figure it out. Together. It should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like the first deep breath she'd taken in years. They talked through the night, wrapped in sheets and each other. Alexander told her about his childhood, about a father who saw emotions as weaknesses to be eliminated, about learning to build walls so high nobody could see the lonely boy inside. Emma told him about her dreams, about moving to New York with such hope, about watching that hope slowly erode under the weight of rejection and unpaid bills and the creeping fear that maybe she wasn't good enough, would never be good enough. You're more than good enough, Alexander said fiercely. The world is just slow to recognize it. You've never even seen my work, Emma pointed out. So show me. He was out of bed before she could protest, pulling on pajama pants and grabbing one of his shirts for her. Come on, show me. Emma found herself laughing as she followed him, swimming in his oversized shirt, her hair a mess, makeup long gone. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through photos of her paintings. Alexander took the phone, studying each image with the intensity he probably brought to business deals. These are incredible, he said finally. That gallery owner who rejected you last month, he's an idiot? I know Sophia Reeves. She owns the Reeves Gallery in Chelsea. I'll call her Monday, set up a meeting. Alexander, no. Emma took her phone back. I don't want your help that way. I don't want to succeed because of who I'm sleeping with. Alexander's expression shuddered slightly, hurt flickering across his features before he could hide it. I'm not offering to buy your success. I'm offering an introduction. What you do with it is entirely up to your talent, which from what I can see is substantial. It feels like charity, Emma said softly. I've been trying to make it on my own. If I accept your help, how will I know if I succeeded? Because I earned it, or because I knew you? He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. I understand. I do. But Emma, refusing help, when it's genuinely offered, isn't strength. Sometimes it's just pride wearing a different mask. The words landed uncomfortably because they felt true. Emma had spent so long trying to prove she could do everything alone that she'd forgotten how to accept help, how to lean on anyone, how to trust that support didn't always come with strings attached. Can I think about it? She asked. Of course. Alexander set her phone down, pulling her into his arms. I'm not trying to fix you or save you. I just want to support the person you already are." They made coffee as the sun rose over Manhattan, painting the city in shades of gold and pink. Emma stood at the windows, watching the world wake up, wearing Alexander's shirt and feeling like she'd stepped into someone else's life. "What happens Monday?" she asked. "We figure it out," Alexander replied, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "I have work. You have work. But we also have this, whatever this is, and we figure out how to make it fit into our lives. People will talk. Your ex will be vicious. Let them talk. I've spent 2 years caring too much about what people think. I'm tired of it." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Besides, Victoria's opinion stopped mattering the moment I realized she never really knew me at all. She loved the idea of me, the status, the wealth. But she never asked about my paintings, never asked what I wanted beyond the empire I was building, never saw me. I see you," Emma whispered. "I know. That's why this terrifies me as much as it thrills me." They spent Sunday together, a day that felt suspended outside of normal time. Alexander taught Emma to make his famous scrambled eggs, which turned out to be nothing special, except that he made them with so much concentration it became endearing. Emma sketched him while he read the newspaper, capturing the way morning light caught his profile, the way his brow furrowed when he was thinking. "You made me look thoughtful," Alexander said, looking at the sketch. "Too kind. I was probably just confused by the crossword. You look like this all the time, like you're carrying the weight of the world and trying to figure out how to set it down without everything collapsing." Emma added shading to his jawline. "Do you ever just rest?" "I'm resting now." But even as he said it, she saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes drifted to his laptop sitting closed on the counter. Emma stood, moving behind him, her hand settling on his shoulders. She began to knead the knotted muscles there, feeling him gradually relax under her touch. "When was the last time someone took care of you?" she asked softly. Alexander was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "My mother, probably. Before she got sick. After she died, I learned to take care of myself. My father wasn't the nurturing type. Care was weakness, and weakness wasn't tolerated in our house." Emma's hand stilled. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It made me who I am. Successful, independent, completely emotionally stunted, but very good at mergers and acquisitions." He said it lightly, but she heard the pain underneath. "You're not emotionally stunted. You're just out of practice." She leaned down, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. "Lucky for you, I'm a very good teacher." The rest of Sunday passed in a blur of simple moments that felt profound. They ordered takeout because neither wanted to brave the outside world. Alexander showed Emma his favorite books, pulling volumes from his shelves and reading her passages that had meant something to him. Emma told him stories about her students, the kids she taught art to twice a week at a community center, the way their faces lit up when they finally captured something real on paper. "You light up when you talk about them," Alexander observed. "They're the reason I keep going when everything else feels impossible. They still believe art matters, that creating something beautiful is important. They haven't learned to be cynical yet." Emma curled closer to him on the couch. "I don't want to teach them that cynicism. I want to protect that belief as long as possible." "Then you need to succeed. Not for you, but for them. So they can see that it's possible, that choosing art doesn't mean choosing poverty and disappointment." He tilted her face up to meet his eyes. "That's why you should take the meeting with Sophia, not as charity, as an investment in those kids' futures." Emma felt tears prick her eyes because he understood, really understood, what drove her. "You're very good at arguing your point. I'm a businessman. Persuasion is my primary skill." He kissed her softly. "Well, one of my primary skills. Arrogant, Emma murmured against his lips, but she was smiling. Monday morning arrived too soon, crashing through their bubble like a stone through glass. Emma woke to find Alexander already dressed in a suit, looking every inch the powerful CEO, the tender man from the weekend, buried under layers of armor. "I have to go to the office," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "But I don't want you to leave. Stay as long as you like. There's food in the kitchen, and you can paint in the studio if you want. My housekeeper doesn't come on Mondays." Emma sat up, clutching the sheet to her chest. "Alexander, I can't just move into your apartment." "I'm not asking you to move in. I'm asking you not to disappear." He cupped her face, his thumb stroking her cheek. "I'm asking you to still be here when I get home, so I know this weekend was real, and not just a beautiful dream I'm going to wake up from." The vulnerability in his voice made her decision. "Okay, I'll be here." Relief flooded his features. He kissed her thoroughly, then pulled back with visible reluctance. "I'll be home by 6. Earlier, if I can manage it." After he left, Emma explored the apartment in daylight. It was even more beautiful than she'd realized, full of small details that revealed Alexander's personality. A collection of vintage cameras on a shelf, a drawer in the kitchen filled with takeout menus from places that definitely didn't deliver to penthouses, a closet in the studio packed with art supplies he'd clearly been collecting but barely using. She spent the morning painting in his studio, losing herself in the work the way she always did. But this time, something was different. The painting that emerged wasn't born from desperation or fear. It was born from hope, from the tentative belief that maybe, possibly, things could work out after all. She was so absorbed, she didn't hear the knock at the door until it became insistent. Emma set down her brush, padding to the entrance in Alexander's shirt and her leggings from Saturday night. When she opened the door, Victoria Ashford stood there, immaculate in a cream suit, her smile sharp as a blade. "Hello, Emma. May I come in?" Emma should have said no. Every instinct screamed at her to close the door, to call Alexander, to protect whatever fragile thing they'd built. But something in Victoria's expression stopped her. Not quite triumph, but close, a certainty that made Emma's stomach clench. "Why are you here?" Emma asked, not moving from the doorway. "To give you a warning, woman to woman." Victoria's eyes were cold. "May I?" Emma stepped aside, immediately regretting it as Victoria swept into the apartment like she owned it. She looked around with proprietary familiarity, her gaze lingering on the painting of the abstract woman on the bedroom wall, visible through the open door. "He painted that when we were together," Victoria said. "He told everyone it was me, his muse, his inspiration. He said he painted it 3 months ago." Emma's voice was steady despite the doubt beginning to creep in. "Did he?" Victoria's smile widened. "Alexander is very good at rewriting history to suit his narrative. It's one of his many talents, along with making women believe they're special, that they've finally reached the real him, when really they're just the latest in a long line of auditions for the role of Mrs. Kane." "Get out." Emma's hands clenched at her sides. "Not until I've said what I came to say." Victoria turned, her expression almost pitying. "You think you're different. You think you're the one who finally saw past his walls, who reached the wounded soul underneath. But darling, I thought that too. So did Sophia before me, and Margaret before her. Alexander doesn't want real connection. He wants the fantasy of it. He wants to play at vulnerability while keeping everyone at arm's length. And when you get too close, when you start asking for real commitment, real emotional availability, he'll disappear behind his work and his walls, and you'll realize you never really had him at all." Emma felt each word land like a blow, but she forced herself to stay standing, to keep her expression neutral. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because unlike Alexander, I'm not cruel." Victoria moved toward the door. He hired you for one night. Now he's extending the contract, making you believe it's real. But it's not. It's just a longer performance. And when he gets bored, when the novelty wears off, he'll discard you the way he's discarded every woman who made the mistake of loving him. I'm trying to save you the heartbreak I experienced. Or you're trying to sabotage something good because you can't stand that he moved on. Victoria paused at the door, looking back. Believe what you want. But when it falls apart, and it will, remember I warned you. She left, and Emma stood in the suddenly too quiet apartment, Victoria's words echoing in her mind. She looked at the painting on the bedroom wall, really looked at it, trying to remember exactly what Alexander had said. Had he said he painted it 3 months ago? Or had she assumed that? Emma pulled out her phone with shaking hands, scrolling to the photos Alexander had sent her earlier. Selfies from the office, silly pictures meant to make her smile. She zoomed in on the background of one, and her heart sank. There, on the wall behind his desk, was a smaller version of that same abstract woman's face. But in this photo, taken a year ago according to the metadata, the painting was already finished. Emma set her phone down, her mind racing. Victoria could be lying. The metadata could be wrong. There could be a dozen explanations. But doubt, once planted, was a persistent weed. She looked around the apartment that had felt like a sanctuary hours ago, and now felt like a stage set, beautiful but hollow. Emma knew she should wait, should talk to Alexander, should give him a chance to explain. But fear was a louder voice than reason, and it whispered that Victoria was right, that this was all performance, that she'd been foolish to believe a weekend could mean everything. She was gathering her things when her phone rang. Alexander's name flashed on the screen, and her thumb hovered over the answer button. Emma. His voice was warm when she finally picked up. I know I said 6, but I'm leaving now. I couldn't wait. I kept thinking about you there, in my space, and I just wanted to be home. Is that crazy? Alexander, we need to talk. The silence that followed was heavy. What happened? Victoria was here. Emma heard him exhale sharply. What did she say? That this is all a game to you. That you've done this before, made women believe they were special, then disappeared when things got real. That you painted that picture of the woman when you were with her, not 3 months ago. Emma's voice cracked. Tell me she's lying. Tell me this weekend meant what I thought it meant. I'm coming home, right now. Don't leave. Please, Emma, just wait for me. He hung up before she could respond. Emma sat on the couch, her packed bag beside her, torn between the instinct to run and the desire to believe. 20 minutes later, Alexander burst through the door, still in his suit, his hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it. He saw her bag and visibly paled. You're leaving? I don't know, Emma said honestly. I don't know what's real anymore. Alexander crossed the room, kneeling in front of her so they were eye level. Everything this weekend was real, every word, every touch, every moment. Victoria is lying because she wants to hurt me, and the best way to do that is to poison what we have before it has a chance to grow. The painting, Emma said. When did you paint it? He closed his eyes briefly. 1.5 years ago, right after Victoria and I split. I was angry, hurt, trying to figure out what I even wanted from love anymore. And I painted that woman, that face, as a kind of wish. Someone who could see me. Someone real. Victoria saw it and assumed it was her, even though I told her it wasn't. She liked the idea that I was still so affected by her that I was painting her image. So you lied to me about when you painted it. Emma's voice was quiet. Not intentionally. When I said 3 months ago, I was talking about when I started dreaming about her. About you, coming to life. When you walked up those steps Saturday night, and I saw you for the first time, it felt like the universe had answered something I didn't even know I was asking for." He took her hands, his grip almost desperate. "I know how that sounds. I know it's too much too fast. But Emma, I've dated a lot of women. I've tried to feel what I felt with you this weekend with dozens of people, and it never happened. Not even close. What we have is rare. Please don't let Victoria's poison kill it before we even have a chance." Emma wanted to believe him. Every part of her that had felt so alive this weekend wanted to silence the doubt and trust that this beautiful, impossible thing was real. But the part of her that had been hurt before, that had learned to protect herself, whispered caution. "I need time," she said finally. "I need to think. Away from this apartment. Away from you. This weekend was intense, and I can't tell what's real and what's just fantasy anymore." Pain flashed across Alexander's face, but he nodded. "Okay, I understand. But can I ask one thing?" "What?" "Don't disappear completely. Take the time you need, but don't vanish from my life. Let's have dinner Thursday. Talk about everything. Let me prove this is real." Emma studied his face, seeing the vulnerability there, the fear that mirrored her own. "Thursday," she agreed. "Dinner. We'll talk." She stood, shouldering her bag, and Alexander walked her to the door. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like he was afraid she'd dissolve if he let go. "I'm falling in love with you," he whispered against her hair. "I know it's too soon to say that. I know it sounds like a line. But it's true, and I needed you to know before you left." Emma pulled back, looking up at him. "Don't say things like that unless you mean them." "I mean them. I mean everything." He kissed her, soft and desperate all at once. "Thursday. I'll prove it Thursday." Emma left before she could change her mind, before she could let his words talk her into staying. The next 3 days were torture. Emma threw herself into work, teaching her classes, painting until her hands cramped. But everything reminded her of Alexander. The coffee shop where they'd talked for hours Sunday morning now served coffee that tasted like ash. Her students asked why she seemed sad, and she couldn't explain that she'd spent one weekend falling in love and was now terrified she'd imagined the whole thing. Wednesday afternoon, a delivery arrived at her apartment. A large, flat package that required her signature. Inside was a canvas, and when Emma unwrapped it, her breath caught. It was the painting she'd started in Alexander's studio Monday morning, the one born from hope. But it wasn't the unfinished work she'd left behind. Alexander had completed it, adding elements that transformed it from good to extraordinary. He'd captured her style perfectly, adding rather than dominating. And in the corner, he'd painted 2 sets of initials intertwined. EH and AK. The note attached was brief. "You started this. I finished it. That's what partnership looks like. It's not one person saving the other. It's 2 people creating something neither could make alone. See you tomorrow. A." Emma stared at the painting for hours, seeing not just the art, but the message underneath. He'd paid attention to her style, her techniques, her vision. He'd supported rather than overwhelmed. He'd made something beautiful by working with her, not for her. Thursday arrived, and Emma dressed with shaking hands. She chose a simple black dress, elegant but not showy, armor that made her feel capable of facing whatever the evening would bring. Alexander had texted an address in the West Village, and when Emma arrived, she found not a restaurant, but a small art gallery. The lights were off, and for a moment, she thought she'd gotten the location wrong. Then the door opened, and Alexander stood there, and the sight of him made her heart stutter. He wore jeans and a soft sweater, looking younger and more vulnerable than the businessman in his suit. "Come in," he said quietly. Emma stepped inside, and he closed the door behind her, locking it so they wouldn't be disturbed. The gallery was small, intimate, with warm wooden floors and white walls. But the walls weren't empty. They were covered with paintings, dozens of them, and as Emma moved closer, she realized they were all Alexander's. "I closed the gallery for tonight," Alexander said, staying near the door as if giving her space. "I wanted to show you something, and I needed privacy to do it." Emma walked slowly around the room, studying each painting. They were all of her, not literally her face, but her essence. A woman laughing, face obscured but joy evident in every brushstroke, hands covered in paint, creating something beautiful. A figure standing at a window at dawn, silhouetted against the rising sun. "I've been painting you for months," Alexander said quietly. "Long before I hired you for that gala. I was dreaming of someone real, someone who could see past the money and the power to the person underneath. And somehow, my subconscious knew what you looked like before my eyes did." He moved closer. "That painting Victoria mentioned, the abstract woman, it's not you specifically, but it's what I hoped existed. And when you appeared, it was like the universe had heard me." Emma turned to face him, tears streaming down her face. "This is insane. You know that, right? People don't fall in love in a weekend. They don't paint each other before they meet. This doesn't happen in real life. Doesn't it?" Alexander crossed the room, stopping just in front of her. "Or does it happen all the time? But most people are too scared or too jaded to believe it when it does." He took her hands. "I'm terrified, Emma. I'm terrified that I'm going to say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, and lose you. I'm terrified that you'll decide this is too much too fast and walk away. I'm terrified because the thought of you not being in my life makes it hard to breathe. But I'm more terrified of not trying, of letting fear make me lose something real because I was too much of a coward to fight for it. Victoria said you do this, that you make women believe they're special, then disappear." "Victoria doesn't know what she's talking about." Alexander's voice was firm. "Yes, I've dated. Yes, I've tried to find connection. But I've never felt with anyone what I feel with you. I've never painted anyone before. I've never opened my studio to someone. I've never spent a Sunday just existing with another person and felt like I'd found home. You're not one of many, Emma. You're the only." Emma searched his face, looking for lies, for performance, for any sign that Victoria's words held truth. All she saw was raw, honest vulnerability. "I'm scared too," she whispered. "I'm scared this is a fairy tale that's going to end badly. I'm scared I'm not enough for your world. I'm scared that one day you'll wake up and realize you could have anyone, someone who fits better, someone who doesn't struggle to pay rent or live in a walk-up or teach art to kids because it's the only stable income she has." "You think those things make you less?" Alexander's hands framed her face. "They make you more. You're fighting for something you believe in. You're choosing passion over practicality. You're teaching kids that creating beauty matters even when the world tells them it doesn't. Emma, you're the most remarkable person I've ever met, and the fact that you don't see that breaks my heart." He kissed her softly, reverently. "I don't want someone who fits my world. I want someone who makes me want to change my world. And that's you." Emma kissed him back, tasting salt from her own tears, feeling the last of her resistance crumble. "This is crazy," she said against his lips. "Completely insane," Alexander agreed, pulling her closer. "But let's be crazy together." They stayed in the gallery for hours, talking about everything. Alexander told her about his plans to shift his business focus, to start investing in arts programs and education rather than just real estate. Emma talked about her dream of opening a community art center, a place where people who couldn't afford lessons could still learn to create. They made plans, tentative and fragile, but plans nonetheless. Alexander would introduce her to Sophia Reeves, but only after Emma had prepared a proper portfolio. Emma would meet his friends, his colleagues, but on her own terms, as herself, not as a version shaped to fit his world. They agreed to take things slow, to build a foundation instead of rushing toward a destination. But they also agreed to be honest, to communicate, to fight for this thing between them even when it got hard. A month later, Emma stood in the Reeves Gallery, her paintings hung on white walls, her name printed on elegant cards. Alexander stood beside her, his hand in hers, as collectors and critics mingled and discussed her work. Sophia Reeves approached with a smile. "You're the talk of the evening. I have 3 offers already, and we haven't even officially opened." Emma squeezed Alexander's hand, grounding herself. "Thank you for giving me this chance." "Thank your work," Sophia replied. "Talent like this speaks for itself. Alexander just got you in the door. You did everything else." After Sophia walked away, Emma looked up at Alexander. "Thank you for believing in me even when I didn't believe in myself." "That's what love is," Alexander said simply. "Seeing someone's potential and giving them space to reach it." "Is that what this is?" Emma asked, even though she knew the answer. "Love? That's what it's been from the start," Alexander replied. "I just had to wait for you to catch up." Emma laughed, the sound bright and free. "Arrogant as always." "Accurate as always," he corrected, pulling her close. "I love you, Emma Hart. I loved you when you walked up those steps in a borrowed dress. I loved you when you were covered in paint in my studio. I loved you when you were scared enough to run but brave enough to come back. I'll love you tomorrow and next year and every day after that, if you'll let me." "I love you too," Emma whispered, the words feeling both enormous and simple. "Even though you're impossible and stubborn and way too good at getting your way." Perfect match, then. Alexander kissed her, and around them, the gallery continued its buzz of activity. But in that moment, they were alone. 2 people who'd started with deception and found truth, who'd gambled on something impossible and won. 3 months later, Alexander proposed again, this time without contract or performance. Just 2 people in his studio, covered in paint from a project they'd been working on, together, and a ring that Emma designed herself because Alexander insisted she should have exactly what she wanted. She said yes without hesitation, without fear, because by then she knew that fairy tales weren't about perfect love. They were about real love, the kind that chose to stay when things got hard, that built something beautiful from honest foundations, that transformed 2 wounded, lonely people into partners, creating a life neither could imagine alone. And when Emma Mitchell married Alexander Kane 6 months later, in a small ceremony that had more paint-covered art students than business executives, when she walked down an aisle lined with canvases they'd painted together, when she promised forever to the man who'd started as a client and become her home, she knew that the best love stories weren't the ones that began perfectly. They were the ones that began with courage, with risk, with 2 people brave enough to believe that impossible things could become real if you fought for them hard enough. Sometimes the most extraordinary love is born from desperate choices and borrowed dresses. Sometimes it comes disguised as a contract, a performance, a single night that was never meant to mean anything. Alexander and Emma didn't find a perfect love, but they found a real one. The kind that chooses vulnerability over safety, that builds trust brick by brick, that proves being seen is worth the risk of being hurt. In the end, she wasn't just hired to pretend to be his wife for one night. She became his wife for every night after, and that made all the difference. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and become a member to get early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, also click the Super Thanks button. Your gesture makes all the difference and helps us continue bringing narratives that move hearts.